So a lot of people say, well, look, just because the United States is running out of oil, which let's be clear, we sort of are, there's still a ton of people that have oil. I mean, for heaven's sakes, the Middle East is full of it. And that's true. The Middle East is full of it. In fact, Saudi Arabia alone sits on about 320 billion barrels of oil, which represents about 25% of the world's known reserves of about 1.4 trillion barrels. But there's a problem. And here it is. If you take a look at the oil exporting nations and you ask the question, how much money does a barrel of oil need to sell for them to be made whole, you'll notice a startling thing. In 2003, the break-even point, and this is in US dollars per barrel, for the oil exporting nations was $21 per barrel. In other words, if during the entire year of 2003, the average price of oil exceeded $21 per barrel, which it did, it was closer to 40, these countries, on average, balanced their budget. Well, the red bar shows you what it looks like today. And the average today is over $60 a barrel. But if you really want to pay attention to the elephant in the room, it's Saudi Arabia. Because for Saudi Arabia, not only is it $64 a barrel, but the people that we speak to in Saudi Arabia tell us that number is going up at $4 a year. So why do I point that out? I point that out to say that the days of cheap oil on a sustained basis are probably behind us. So a lot of people talk about how volatility, like that which we're experiencing today, we've seen a collapse of $25 in the price of a barrel of oil in the last 3 months. A lot of people assume that that means cheap oil will still be around. I would caution that. There are two reasons this is happening. The first is a technological reason. The oil fields in these countries, with the exception of Iraq, which I don't have on here because the data on Iraq are largely uncertain. Maybe that's an interesting discussion point later, is how does Iraq change the mix here? These are largely mature oil fields. In fact, the largest single oil field in the world, which is known as the King of Kings, is Ghawar. Ghawar was discovered in the late 1950s. Now, there was a day when oil seeped out of Ghawar, with virtually little effort, literally a marginal cost per barrel of $2. But that's not happening anymore. So when you go to Saudi Arabia and you actually walk on these fields, I've had the privilege of doing this, you realize that it actually costs more to get oil out of these fields today because of the maturation process that's taken place. So first off, there's a technology issue here, which is it doesn't cost $60 to get a barrel out of Saudi ground. Let me be clear, it does not. But it costs more than it did a decade ago and significantly more than it did 3 decades ago. The second issue is one of how you define balancing a budget. To balance a budget implies that you make more than you spend. And it's the spending that's also gone up significantly. The degree of social subsidization in these countries has skyrocketed. And in fact, if you look at just what King Abdullah has had to spend in the last 9 months, he has literally spent 1/3 of the cash reserves held by Saudi Arabia to placate his population.